Magandang araw mga ka-aerial defense, may ibabahagi na naman ako sa inyo dahil ngayong araw na ito ay may bagay tayong pag-uusapan. PCG matapang na sinagot ang Colonel ng Chinese Air Force, pero bago tayo magpatuloy wag mo muna kalimutan mag-like, share, and subscribe, paki-follow at like muna ng aming page na nasa description na ang link. Sa isa pang Philippines at China face-off na sa pagkakataong ito ay naganap sa harap ng sea of academics, policymakers at mga opisyal ng gobyerno mula sa buong mundo, isang retiradong senior Air Force Colonel ng China ang inakusahan ang mga Pilipino ng barbarity, binanggit ang dalawang magkahiwalay na insidente kung saan isang mangingisda mula sa China at isa pa mula sa Taiwan ang pinatay, bilang reaksyon sa virtual presentation ni Philippine Coast Guard Commodore J. Terriles sa isang conference sa South China Sea sa Vietnam. Sinabi ni Joe Bo, isang senior fellow ng Center for International Security and Strategy ng Tsinghua University, na ang opisyal ng PCG ay naglalarawan na ang China ay bilang devil in the region habang ang Pilipinas ay halos mukhang anghel.
Well, I'm Senior Colonel Joe Bo, retired from China. In all your speech, what do you want to say? Basically, I can anticipate. It's not a surprise to me, but it is surprising to me to see how you portray China as a devil in the region, while yourself look almost like an angel. But let me ask you a question that I talked yesterday. In 2000 and 2013, Filipino Coast Guard killed Chinese fishermen from Island Island and from Taiwan. Why were you so barbaric to kill Chinese fishermen? And why a country that is never stronger militarily than China could behave so barbarically against the innocent Chinese fishermen? And is it because that you believe these fishermen are so innocent, so can do anything against them? And is it because the Chinese policy toward you at that time was so tolerant that we did nothing against you, so you could do that? So is it something that China should reflect to extend that we have to increase our presence with a stronger Coast Guard? Please tell me frankly.
I'll be very frank in responding to your question. Thank you for using the word barbaric. Coast Guards in the region, not just the Philippine Coast Guard, is not a barbaric. You were mentioning about the shooting incident in Taiwan in 2013 and also a maritime incident that happened between the Philippine Navy and Vietnam. All of these were already diplomatically settled now. We now have established a good relationship with Taiwan and also with Vietnam. But here's the thing now. Among the countries in the region, we all have a positive diplomatic relationships in discussing the South China Sea. And all of these countries have issues with the China Coast Guard and the Chinese Maritime Militia pretending to be Chinese fishing vessels. You keep on mentioning the word barbarism. But as I said, we abide with the international rules-based order, with the images and videos that we have already presented to the international community, in which I know that the People's Republic of China is not really pleased. We have portrayed the word that you are saying, but I'm not going to use that against you. I think the transparency initiative that we have been espousing for the past months is a clear understanding of what the word barbarism is. Because Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines will always abide with the international rules-based order. I just don't know whether People's Republic of China is also willing to do the same. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I would like to extend my gratitude to the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for extending an invitation to me. However, I must express my sincere apologies for not being able to join you in Hanoi. Before I proceed with my presentation, I would like to emphasize that the views that I'll be presenting are solely based on my academic research and do not represent the official position of the Philippine government, particularly the Philippine Coast Guard and the National Task Force West Philippine Sea. As a scholar, I stand before you today, separate from my role as a Coast Guard officer. To contribute directly to the panel discussion, I would like to address the three guide questions mentioned in the panel's descriptive background. However, I will begin by addressing the question of how Coast Guards can be utilized for cooperation and peace in the South China Sea. As you all know, Coast Guards can play a crucial role in promoting cooperation and maintaining peace in the South China Sea, since it has mutual roles that largely affect the established maritime order, particularly in ensuring maritime safety, protecting the marine environment, and enforcing maritime laws. By leveraging these capabilities and expertise of Coast Guards, nations can promote stability, enhance security, and foster peaceful resolutions in the region. It is worth mentioning that the Coast Guard is not a new maritime organization. The birth of the Coast Guard goes way back during the early days of the United States state building as a revenue collector and during the commencement of international merchant shipping in Europe for the safety of life and property at sea. The Coast Guard's genesis can be traced back to the U.S. Coast Guard's history and Her Majesty's Coast Guard. Both of these maritime agencies are proof that it coexisted with the Navy but performed completely different mandates. Throughout the years, its mere role of tax collector and lifesaver had metamorphosed to a maritime constabulary unit that carries out the protection of the marine environment and enforcement of maritime laws. In other words, the Coast Guard had emerged as an agency different from that of the Navy that does not supplant the latter's territorial defense roles. This was the Coast Guard's origin, an agency that institutionalized its roles in maritime safety, maritime law enforcement, and marine environmental protection. Both the respective Coast Guards have safeguarded the national interest by initially ensuring that smuggling activities are entirely halted and that the custom obligations are practically settled. These two maritime forces' roles have evolved as time passed, with diverse missions that they perform all along as a significant partner for their respective navies during wartime. Their development from customs revenue collector to a naval sidekick has not overshadowed their most crucial role in saving lives, ensuring safety at sea, and protecting the marine environment. Secondly, the Coast Guard template that the United States and the United Kingdom long established has been adopted in the region to address domestic concerns, particularly in effective maritime governance. As seen from Japan and the Philippines, the United States created the Coast Guard to address a wide range of issues, from lighthouse building to preventing illegal immigrants. Its practicality and flexibility to be used in improving maritime governance were also the reason why this was created in Malaysia and also in Vietnam. The traditional Coast Guard roles institutionalized in the United States had been diffused and molded to fit the demand of these countries in the region. Furthermore, the setting that the U.S. Coast Guard was not placed temporary Coast Guards for Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and even Vietnam. Third, the Coast Guard's utilization in patrolling the disputed waters became a turning point for its evolution from a mere agency that ensures the safety of life and property at sea, protect the marine environment, and enforces maritime laws. The inclusion of maritime security among its role, particularly in patrolling the disputed waters, looks like a departure from its original mission. The Coast Guards in the region embrace this particular role since they recognize that the White Hull ship is a solution to prevent the militarization of the dispute and at the same time ease the tension among the claimant states. Although this new role propelled the Coast Guard's development in the region, this somehow distorted its traditional identity. Lastly, besides the evolution of the Coast Guard functions throughout the years, it showed that states have a varying appreciation of employing the maritime agency. Initially, the Coast Guard establishment and development's main objective is only related to addressing domestic concerns, mainly those related to maritime constabulary functions. However, over the years, the states have also used the Coast Guard in engaging the region for cooperation, in addressing mutual interests, particularly in addressing non-traditional security threats like piracy, smuggling, and even drug trafficking. The Coast Guard utilization in patrolling the contested waters has once again changed the state's appreciation to this agency. The Coast Guard's flexible and adaptable identity has allowed the states to perceive it as an agency that could best fit its interests, whether domestically or even externally. Beyond advancing each other's territorial interests in the South China Sea, Coast Guard cooperation is valuable in addressing non-traditional security threats, promoting rules-based governance, and ensuring Southeast Asia's waterways are safe and secure. Therefore, Coast Guard have critical functions that could provide more avenues for regional cooperation. In this premise that I have used in responding to the first question, I would like to respond now to the first two questions about the role of Coast Guard, whether it stabilizes or destabilizes the maritime domain, as well as their impact on the elimination or broadening the gray zone. The role of Coast Guard organization in the region have evolved beyond their traditional functions, how encompassing patrolling contested waters is. This expansion of responsibilities has sparked debates among scholars, who argue that Coast Guards are blurring the line between defense and constabulary roles, entering what is known as the gray zone area. Initially established to perform maritime constabulary duties and promote cooperation, these Coast Guard organizations are now seen as gray zone strategies employed by states to assert territorial claims. This situation is further complicated by the establishment and utilization of the China Coast Guard. The China Coast Guard presence has distorted the identity of Coast Guards and led maritime security scholars to view them differently. Instead of perceiving them as a fulfilling maritime security roles, Coast Guards are now seen as deceptive smokescreens used to advance territorial claims with less emphasis on those traditional functions that I mentioned earlier. The attention and dominance of the China Coast Guard in the South China and East China Seas have led to a generalization that Coast Guard developments in the region solely reflect gray zone strategies and disregarded their other traditional significant roles. The behavior of the China Coast Guard at sea during patrols has worsened the overall image of Coast Guard. Rather than being seen as a potential de-escalation approach, the China Coast Guard actions have raised concerns that Coast Guard competitions could escalate conflicts in the South China Sea. This tainted the narrative that undermines the intent of deploying Coast Guards to reduce tensions. It is important to note that while China Coast Guard has dominating presence in the South China Sea, it does not represent all Coast Guards in the region. Many Coast Guard organizations continue to fulfill their traditional roles and contribute to maritime governance, the safety and environmental protection. However, the prominence of the China Coast Guard and its actions have overshadowed these contributions in the discourse surrounding Coast Guard development in the region. Taking lessons from the 2012 Scarborough Shoal standoff, the Chinese government took measures to consolidate its maritime administrative agencies, referred to as the Five Dragons steering up the sea, and established the China Coast Guard. This is a time that the maritime scholars argued that this move was also aimed at asserting China's sovereignty over the contested areas in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, bringing them under its domestic laws. Interestingly, since its inception, the China Coast Guard has primarily relied on its white-hulled vessels to conduct patrols in the disputed waters. These China Coast Guard ships have accompanied Chinese fishing vessels or Chinese maritime militia and have become more assertive in upholding China's sovereignty against claimants from Southeast Asian countries. These China Coast Guard have denied entry to Southeast Asian nations into contested areas like Scarborough Shoal and even the Paracel Islands. By employing the China Coast Guard for patrolling the South China Sea, Beijing has sought to counter accusations of militarization in the region's sea dispute. However, many scholars argue that the creation of the China Coast Guard serves as a mere facade, concealing China's true intention of de-escalation or non-provocation. Although China Coast Guard white ships may appear to be ordinary law enforcement vessels, they possess lethal capabilities that contradict the traditional role of Coast Guard. It is worth noting that a significant number of China Coast Guard vessels are refurbished naval frigates, previously decommissioned by the People's Liberation Army Navy with their naval armaments intact. The gray zone tactic that most scholars claim in explaining the Coast Guard development fully applies to understanding China Coast Guard's growth. The China Coast Guard's formation, separate from the State Oceanic Administration, reveals its true purpose. It is contrary to the traditional Coast Guard roles focused on maritime safety, marine environmental protection, and maritime law enforcement. Therefore, the rise of the White House among the Southeast Asian countries is a positive development since it strengthens the maritime order to ascertain that the sea trade routes that affect the global economy is safe, the marine environment is protected, the nefarious activities are suppressed, and that the territorial disputes are de-escalated if we're only going to talk about the Southeast Asian countries creating their own Coast Guard. However, it is very significant to mention that China Coast Guard does not align with the prevailing regional Coast Guard norm that Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even the South Asian Coast Guards is supporting. China Coast Guard is the only Coast Guard in Asia that puts the white painted hulls of the Coast Guards in the gray zone. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Pagkatapos ay binanggit ni Joe noong 2000 na pagpatay sa isang mangingisdang Chino ng PCG at ang isa pa ay mula sa isang isla mula sa Taiwan noong 2013. Sinabi ng PCG na ang Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia at Pilipinas na may magkasalungat na pag-aangkin sa bahagi ng South China Sea kasama ang China ay palaging susunod sa International Rules-Based Order. Ang apat na bansa ay kasosyo sa 10 miyembro ng Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Sinabi ng China na mayroon itong mga karapatan sa soberanya sa halos buong South China Sea, ngunit pinawalang bisa ng isang internasyonal na arbitral tribunal noong 2016, ang mga makasaysayang pag-angkin nito sa ilalim ng United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Sa kanyang pahayag sa komperensya, sinabi ng PCG na ang pagkamatay ng mangingisdang Taiwanese ay naayos ng diplomatiko. Naganap ang malalang pamamaril sa Balantang Channel sa pagitan ng Taiwan at Pilipinas noong May 9, 2013, habang hinahabol ng PCG patrol ang fishing boat na Guangdashing No. 28, na pumasok umano sa Exclusive Economic Zone ng Pilipinas. Ang pagkamatay ng mangingisda ay nagpaputol ng ugnayan sa pagitan ng Pilipinas at Taiwan. Nagpadala si Pangulong Benigno Aquino III ng personal na kinatawan para humingi ng tawad sa pamilya ng biktima. Sa naunang insidente, napatay ang kapitan ng Chinese fishing boat na Liang Hai noong May 27, 2000, habang 7 sa kanyang mga tripulante ang arestado kasunod ng sagupaan sa mga tauhan ng PCG sa baybayin ng Barangay Ibaan sa lalawigan ng Rizal, Palawan. Ito ang unang naiulat na insidente kung saan sumiklab ang putukan sa pagitan ng PCG at mga Chinese poachers. Nakuha mula sa mga Chinese ang pinatuyong karne ng pagong at 6 na buhay na pagong. Tumanggi ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas na bayaran ang pamilya ng napatay na skipper, ngunit pumayag na palayain ang iba pang mangingisda na kinasuhan ng ilegal na pagpasok sa karagatan ng Pilipinas, pangangaso at panghuli ng mga endangered species. Para sa mas madaming update tungkol sa ating defense, abangan lamang ang aking mga bagong video. Para naman sa mga gusto magpa-shoutout, mag-comment lamang po at share, paki-follow at like muna ng aming page na nasa description na ang link. Pwede ka ring manalo ng pera or load dito kapag ikaw ay naging top fan nito at napili. Huwag mo na rin kalimutan mag-like, share, and subscribe. Pindutin mo na rin ang bell para updated kayo sa aking mga video. Maraming salamat po.